Hey, I'm Kevin, and today I'm going to show you how I made these nightstands with the Japanese Naguri pattern drawer front in the KevBotWorkshop. So I kind of been moving slowly on projects lately, taking on too many things, starting on one thing before finishing another, so I'm working my way through the backlog of projects and videos to show you guys. A couple years ago, I made a Japanese-inspired bed for myself, and now I wanted to make matching nightstands. I wouldn't call myself a furniture designer per se. I usually just snoop around the internet for a while until I find something that I like and try to make it match whatever kind of technique or skill I want to do. Sometimes I'll see something that will inspire me to design a piece along those lines. That's what happened with making the bed. I had seen Japanese woodworking and stumbled upon arches and architecture like these. From there I went ahead and designed a bed with a similar design that I thought would look nice in my home. For the nightstands, I wanted something that made this all a set but wasn't too on the nose of matching. I came up with this design that's just a box on top with legs and supports that match the look of the bed. I was able to make one set of nightstands from 3 boards of cherry and a few scraps of maple. Even though I've tried to dial in my bandsaw, I'm still getting too much drift when I'm trying to resaw a board. So I cut the majority on my table saw and was able to finish the cut at the bandsaw. At some point I will get a new blade and dial it in correctly so I can skip the additional steps. Once these have been resawn, I clean them up at the planer. I can join the boards using some dowels to help with alignment. This is a process known as book matching that I also did on the bed build because it is a great way of taking thicker stock and making wider boards where the grain matches up and flows. With the boards made, I ripped them down to their final width before cutting them to length. Now earlier in the video when I was telling my life story, I broke down the boards so that I can work with them easier. Rather than 2 8-foot boards, I had 4 more manageable 4-foot boards. So now I can cut these down to length for even more manageable pieces, but I will eventually need to miter the edges as it is the joinery I have chosen and it will give me a continuous grain that I'm looking for. Before I cut the miters, I use my dado stack to cut the dado into the boards to accept the plywood backing. For the miters, since these are already cut down to their final length, I need to sneak up on the corner as to not take off more from the exterior length. The last thing to do before assembling the box is cutting the 1/4-inch plywood to fit for the back. This is the second box I put together. The first one wasn't as graceful as a process, so I won't show you that one. The one piece of advice I have for glue-ups is to envision everything you will need and have it all laid out so that you aren't panicking and trying to fix things before the glue dries.
It is my professional opinion that now is the time to panic!
While the glue dries, let's jump ahead and start working on the base for the nightstands. Here is where it most resembles the bed with the decorative sides and uses supports for legs. Just like the bed, I am working with 1-inch stock for all my supports and 2-inch stock for the legs. To match the legs, I cut all the support pieces at 2 inches wide as well. Then with my crosscut sled and a stop, I can batch out all the pieces. For assembly, I went with dowels using my Rockler dowel jig. It is a little bit more difficult to drill the dowel holes on the smaller pieces, so you can see how I set it up here. I'm using multiple clamps to hold the piece and the jig down and one more to support the piece in the back so the force doesn't move it back. Now I can do the glue up. I am doing this in separate glue ups because after the first I can easily sand these all together. To find where I need to drill for the dowels on the legs, I am using center points. I'll lay down the supports on top of a piece of ply to raise it up the appropriate amount, and then line up the legs to make marks. I used a board on top to make sure everything was in line. With a little pressure, it makes marks on the legs just so enough I can darken them with a pen. And now I know where to drill the holes. Before I did the final assembly, I chamfered the bottoms. I do this on all my furniture. Even though this will be on carpet right now, if it is ever dragged in the future, it will help avoid blowout. Now that the glue is dried on the boxes, we can go and strengthen the joint. Miter joints are a quick and easy way to assemble boxes or frames, but they aren't the strongest as it's an end grain to end grain connection. End grain is very porous and absorbs a lot of glue, which makes it a weak joint that can split over time. To combat this, we're going to insert splines. On my table saw with my 45-degree angle cutting jig and a dado stack installed, I cut grooves into the corners. I scribed lines on the boxes and then lined them up with lines I put on the jig to consistently and evenly space the grooves. In the past, I've used splines of contrasting colored wood to make an interesting feature, but this time I wasn't looking to make them stand out as much, so I used cherry splines to almost completely blend in. In the end product, you can subtly see them, which I think is a nice touch. While the glue dries on the splines, I can do the last bit of cutting that I will need to do on this project, and that's for making the drawers out of 1/2-inch ply, 1/4-inch ply bottoms, and cherry false drawer fronts. With the glue dried on the splines, I can flush them up with a Japanese pull saw. I placed down some blue painter's tape to protect the top. In the past, the saw has gone astray and marred the piece I was working on. It takes extra work to sand and fix that, but with the tape, you'll cut the tape before the piece, signaling you to stop and correct before you go too far. Now before I install the drawer slides, I went ahead and finished the inside of the boxes so I didn't have to finish around the slides in the future. This is not completely necessary. You could leave it unfinished if you wanted to, but I couldn't live with myself if I knew I left it unfinished. Using scrap pieces cut down to the specific sizes as spacers, I'll install the slides. Then I'll attach the drawer side. I explained in my tool storage video that I do it this way so I can get an exact measurement for the drawer. While it is easy to mock something up with dimensions in SketchUp, not everything is always cut perfectly, so any deviation from the original plan is fixed this way. The drawers are assembled the way I always do it, and that's with pocket holes. Usually I'll put down a couple coats of finish on the drawer pieces before I assemble them. Now you could buy pre-finished plywood to skip this step, but I usually buy unfinished plywood and do it myself. This time, to make it easier on myself, I'm using my new paint sprayer to apply a few coats of polyacrylic. I do have to say this is much easier than using a foam brush. Even though this was my first time using the sprayer, it was really quick and I think I could do it even quicker with more experience. At this point, we are almost done with the project. The last thing to do is to work on the drawer fronts. Some of my projects are interesting concepts on their own, while others are pretty straightforward woodworking projects. Because they're pretty basic, I try to add some sort of special feature to give them an interesting talking point. Whether it's the segmented center on my coffee table, my mixed media coasters, or the kinetic door on my computer desk, I'm constantly trying to think of something that will give a project that wow factor. I've always wanted to do some sort of carved wood texture, and so I stumbled upon a Japanese wood carving technique called Naguri. It's been floating around the internet for a little bit. I thought this would work well with the previously mentioned Japanese-inspired base. This also comes at the perfect time, as it is my submission to the latest Rockler challenge, the Try That Challenge. Since this is something I've always wanted to do, it fits in perfectly with that challenge. To make the Naguri style drawer fronts, or Naguri, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, I built up this jig I have right here. Now, this is not my own invention. I've seen a couple other people online making these, and I'll put a link down in the description to show where I got my information from. I'd love to give credit on whoever invented this originally, but I don't know who that is. So I just kind of broke it down with what they had and built my own. So I'll show you how I did it. The jig is made up of these 5 parts. The centerpiece is able to rock back and forth freely while being held up by these 2 sides, and the whole thing is held together by these cross pieces. The most difficult part is making this piece right here. I started by drilling for the dowels on the sides and then drilling all the way through on the end for a bolt to go through. Then I needed a hole in the center to hold my router. Now, I tried many different hole saw sizes, and they were either too loose or not big enough. So after a few tests, I figured I can get a much closer fit by starting with a Forstner bit and stepping up with a rabbiting router bit. Since I have more Forstner bit sizes, I can get a much tighter fit. Now, we are looking for a hole that is only slightly bigger than the diameter of the router, so that when we make a relief cut, we can squeeze the board around the router with a bolt. The last cutting is just to make room for the bolt head and nut, and router button and threading. I'll glue the dowels in on the center pieces, but not on the sides, as we want it to move.
Of course.
As you can see, the hole I made for the router lets it have a little bit of wiggle, and to make it an even more snug fit, I put some rubber bands around the router to act almost like a gasket. So now, even without the bolt, this has barely any movement. When I do add the bolt and tighten it down, there is absolutely no movement. Now that the centerpiece is done, the jig can be assembled. For the side pieces, I experimented with the height of the holes to get the right amount of cut I was looking for. The lower it is, the deeper the cut. To hold down my boards, I used a KevBotWorkshop classic trick of painter's tape and CA glue. Now I'm going with a random pattern, basically filling in wherever I think there should be a groove. It got very grid-like as I got better, so if you need to be exact, I would suggest doing a lot of practice before you do it on your finished piece. I found it easy to work in the middle as the jig had something to ride on. You could put down a board with the same thickness on the left and right to support the jig, but I don't always want to have that extra piece to do that. So I made one more piece that matched the side, but I cut a slot in it so that I can make this piece an adjustable leg. This was also not my invention. I got this idea from the gripper. After all the grooves are cut, I can get everything ready for finishing. This included sanding each and every one of these. My finishing technique is the same as the bed, starting with a coat of shellac to minimize the blotching of the cherry wood, followed by a few coats of armor seal, lightly sanding between coats. Before final assembly, I used my biscuit cutting bit and my router to cut grooves for Z-clips, allowing for seasonal movement. I didn't mention it before, but I'm using push-to-open drawer slides with a soft close feature. This means I don't need drawer pulls, and I think it helps keep the focus on the beautiful texture. To attach the fronts, I'm using playing cards to evenly space the false drawer fronts. After knowing how many cards I needed, I'll take out the top drawer so I can get in and secure the bottom front with screws. I'd suggest stronger double-sided tape to hold the fronts on because this one fell off and dented on the floor. I'll have to fix that later, but at this point I'm calling this project done. If you like this project and you want to see more like it, why don't you go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button and turn on that bell to get a notification when new videos come out. If you want to see similar projects, I'll have a couple more loaded up for you somewhere up here. That's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time in the KevBotWorkshop.